It's interesting seeing gaming YouTube react to that Gamexplain video. Is Nintendo boring now? Because to me, Gamexplain has been doing this since like the Wii U era, right? This is very typical for them, is to just put out some like stupid video like discussing all of Nintendo's recent failings and play the part of the jaded fan. Like I feel like more and more people are starting to see through this nonsense. People look at grifters like Arlo or the BitBlock or well, the BitBlock isn't really a grifter, but like you look at like YouTubers like that, right? Gamexplain, the Gerard the Completionist, I think, is a recent example. Pro Jared. You look at these guys who like cover Nintendo games and just sit there and try to tell you that like, oh, this is the worst they've ever been. Oh, this is one of the worst games I've ever played. Oh, where's the creativity? Where's the soul? And like you look at like games like Mario Wonder, like Fire Emblem Engage, like Tears of the Kingdom, and you realize that like these journalists, like these critics, like these YouTubers, they don't know what they're talking about. They really don't. Like Princess Peach Showtime, I think is a really good example of this because what did we hear going into this? Like, oh, it's gonna be too easy. Oh, it's gonna be made for little girls. Oh, it's not gonna be a very good game at all. And then it comes out and it's like by far one of the best games of the year so far. And have you seen anybody acknowledge that? No. Like you see Arlo like seriously try and come out and say like yeah, actually it's not that fun. Like and a 40-minute long video to like say that, and it's not true. Like I've played through Princess Peach Showtime several times now, and I can tell you that the game is a lot of fun to play. Like I love the game. You'll see people sit there and try to tell you that like, oh, nothing's coming out this year. Oh, it's been a slow year for Nintendo. Like ignoring like all of the great third-party games, the remakes, the new stuff that's come out. Unicorn Overlord was great. Penny's Big Breakaway, like Freedom Planet 2, which apparently came out on PC 2 years ago. But like, like you have a lot of options, right? There's so many games on Switch now that I find it very difficult to believe that the vast majority of the audience have played all of them. Like I myself need to get through Trails of Cold Steel 3 and Blaster Master Zero 3. Right, I have options. Like I want to beat Harvest Moon 64 and like play through GoldenEye and do a lot of other stuff like that. Play through Breath of Fire again. Like I've been playing a lot of things on my Switch, right? Not necessarily the newest game that comes out, right? Like how again, this is what I mean when I say it feels like gaming YouTubers have lost the plot, right? Like the narrative right now with Gamexplain is that like, oh, uh, Nintendo isn't as creative as they were during the Wii U era. What happened to all the experimental titles? Yeah, the experimental titles that you rejected, right? People saw like the Wonderful 101 and laughed at it. People saw Kirby and the Rainbow Curse and thought it looked stupid. People saw Xenoblade Chronicles 3, Xenoblade Chronicles X and rejected it. Like Star Fox Zero is like still one of the most hated Nintendo games ever. Purely for like arbitrary reasons, like purely because like furries are upset that Crystal is in the game, right? It certainly has nothing to do with the game itself, right? Because none of them ever played it. But like the reality is, uh, Gamexplain and other channels like it spent that entire period of like Nintendo's peak in through I would say 2013. Nah, more like yeah, Nintendo's peak from like 2013 to 2017, right? A period of time where they put out some of the best games they've ever put out ever. The Link Between Worlds, Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, like the Breath of the Wild, right? Like they were putting out like absolute bangers all all throughout that all through that period, right? Like Fire Emblem Awakening came out in 2012. Yeah, it's probably more like 2011 to 2017, right? A 6-year period of just nothing but bangers. Absolute stellar releases. You know, from the Wii U, the Wii, the Wii U, the 3DS, killer lineup. What did you do? You spat on Skyward Sword. You thought Kid Icarus Uprising was too gimmicky. You tried to say Awakening killed the franchise, even though it's like the best selling Fire Emblem game ever. What? Like you tried to say that like 3D Land was disappointing. You tried to say that like 3D World looked worse than Sonic Lost World, right? You tried to say that that the Wii U had no games, that Pikmin 3 couldn't save it, that Mario Kart couldn't save it. You tried sitting there and telling us that like the Wii U had no games, even though that like the PS4 was right there and had nothing its entire generation, right? You certainly don't see anybody say that the PS5 has no games now. Like even though it's been on the market like forever and still has absolutely nothing of value, right? Like again, there's a reason why people are not taking Game Explain seriously because they have seen this happen, right? I think 10 years ago, like gaming YouTubers kind of had the monopoly on like Nintendo discussions online. But now that like the market has become saturated a bit and people have like seen behind the curtain a little bit as to like what these people are actually like, Andre Seegers, I've been of Game Explain, I've been noticing that like people have nothing but contempt for him. And it's well deserved, right? I'm not speaking out about against that at all, but it's the same kind of contempt I had for him back in 2014 or back in E3 2015, where he and the guys like seriously tried pretending that that was a bad showing. Like that kind of mindset, that kind of behavior wouldn't fly today. We've had several directs that are worse than like E3 2015 recently. And although there have been like some people who have been trying to push the narrative that like Nintendo is doomed, especially after that like farming direct, right? Was that the one I called the worst ever? No, no, it was the one after that. Um, there was one I called the worst ever recently, within the last year or so. I think it was the one after the farming direct, but yeah, I there have been a lot of directs that have been like very disappointing lately, right? Uh, But again, like the YouTubers haven't been able to fabricate the same kind of narrative in regard to the Switch because it's simply too popular. Like they have fallen out of favor in regards to the public. Nobody listens to them when it comes to game coverage anymore. And all they can do is just kind of pretend that like Princess Peach Showtime isn't successful, even though it is. Like all they can do is just create this illusion that Nintendo is like struggling or that like their games aren't as creative as they used to be or whatever. And to a certain extent, yeah, I do agree that games aren't as creative as they used to be. But there's a reason for it. Because we saw the market reject those creative games going into throughout the new tens, right? Like we saw them a decade ago reject all these cool, interesting, unique ideas. Like we saw that happen. Like again, I totally understand why Nintendo has decided to play it safe this gen and like focus on like the stuff that's really popular. And although I don't like it, I do miss like the days of like platinum games just putting out like something absolutely crazy or whatever. Like I do understand like why it had to happen. And it is because of you, right? You did not support the Wii U. You did not support the 3DS. You did not support like many of the unique titles on these platforms, right? You hated Arms when it was shown off. Arms I think is like the last breath of like really cool, creative Nintendo design, right? And you didn't see anybody like really acknowledge that at the time. When that game came out, like everybody was like desperately trying to convince you that the game bombed. Like I still see people say that like Arms failed. Like even though it was extremely successful for a new fighting game IP, right? For me, for me, gamers need to acknowledge that they get the industry that they deserve, right? The reason why you don't get creative games, the reason why like microtransactions are shoved into everything and that like everything is overpriced and everything is trash, you know, it's because you didn't support the good stuff. Like that is what it all boils down to.